Sophia's emerald signal appears only at the moment when alignment has already stabilized, and when it does, the direction of desire reverses. Instead of being pursued, what belongs to you begins moving toward you through subtle structural shifts. This is not a feeling to maintain or a belief to protect, but a reorganization of how reality responds once coherence is present. When that reorganization takes place, the signal does not repeat, because there is nothing left for it to initiate. Most experiences in life feel repeatable because they operate inside effort, reinforcement, and time. You can revisit them, recreate them, or attempt to improve them. This is not one of those experiences. Sophia's emerald signal does not function as information added to the mind or inspiration layered onto motivation. It functions as recognition. And recognition, once it occurs at the level of orientation rather than emotion, changes how everything is referenced from that point forward. You do not return to the same internal position after it lands, which is why repetition becomes unnecessary. The idea that this will not repeat is often misinterpreted as urgency or exclusivity. In truth, it has nothing to do with scarcity. It has to do with completion. Certain signals only emerge when a cycle has already reached its natural end. They are not meant to start momentum, but to resolve it. When that resolution happens, the loop closes quietly. There is no need for reminders, reinforcements, or continued exposure, because nothing remains open. This is where coincidence dissolves. What once appeared as random timing begins to reveal a structural logic that does not depend on belief. You are not being convinced of something new. You are recognizing something that has already been operating beneath awareness. Sophia's emerald signal does not ask for trust or faith. It aligns perception with what is already true, and once perception shifts, experience reorganizes automatically. This is also the point where desire begins to behave differently. Desire is no longer something that pulls you forward or keeps you waiting. It becomes directional information that the field responds to without negotiation. You may notice that certain outcomes feel closer without effort, or that opportunities appear without planning. This is not acceleration. It is alignment. When coherence replaces anticipation, movement no longer needs to originate from you. The past loses its grip because it no longer defines possibility. The future loses its charge because it no longer needs to be reached. What remains is a present state that does not function as a bridge, but as a point of stability. From that stability, reality responds in kind. Not dramatically, not instantly, but inevitably. This is how Sophia's emerald signal pulls your desires toward you, not through attraction rituals or focus, but through structural correspondence. If the mind attempts to frame this as something to remember later or return to again, that impulse fades. The signal does not anchor itself in memory. It integrates into orientation. Once orientation shifts, effort becomes redundant and repetition becomes meaningless. This is the nature of a signal that appears once, completes its function, and settles. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. There is a precise point where seeking does not end because it fails, but because it finishes. Up until that point, searching for answers, techniques, or confirmation serves a real function. It orients attention, refines sensitivity, and builds the conditions required for recognition. Seeking was never a mistake. It was a stage. What changes here is not the value of seeking, but its relevance once recognition stabilizes. This shift does not arrive as a decision. You do not choose to stop looking. The impulse to search simply loses momentum. Questions that once carried urgency soften. Methods that once felt necessary begin to feel redundant. This is not apathy or disengagement. It is resolution. The system no longer needs input because the reference point has changed. When recognition becomes structural rather than conceptual, seeking has nothing left to accomplish. At this moment, effort does not get replaced by a better strategy or a more refined practice. It dissolves without substitution. That absence can feel unfamiliar at first, not because something is missing, but because something habitual has ended. The mind is accustomed to movement, adjustment, and optimization. When those processes fall silent, it can misinterpret stillness as stagnation. In reality, this stillness signals that alignment is already operating. This is where Sophia's emerald signal begins functioning in a tangible way. The signal does not activate while the system is still searching. It becomes effective precisely when effort is no longer driving perception. As long as attention is oriented toward finding, improving, or achieving, the field remains responsive but conditional. When that orientation dissolves, response becomes automatic. The signal does not amplify desire. It reorganizes the relationship between desire and reality. What collapses here is not curiosity or awareness, but dependency. The need for external confirmation fades because recognition no longer relies on reinforcement. You may notice that you are no longer measuring progress or interpreting signs for reassurance. Experiences begin to register without commentary. Outcomes no longer feel like rewards or proofs. They feel appropriate. This neutrality is not indifference. It is coherence. Seeking always implies distance. It assumes something is ahead, missing, or incomplete. When recognition stabilizes, that assumption no longer holds. You are no longer oriented toward a future resolution. You are positioned within a resolved structure. From this position, movement still occurs, but it is no longer driven by effort. It is driven by correspondence. Reality responds because there is nothing interfering with response. This is why seeking does not return once it collapses. You cannot go back to searching for what is no longer framed as absent. The mind may attempt to revive old habits, but they fail to gain traction. Not because they are resisted, but because they no longer align with the current orientation. The system has updated its reference point, and outdated behaviors simply do not engage. The exact moment seeking becomes irrelevant is quiet. There is no announcement, no realization to hold on to. There is only the absence of urgency and the presence of stability. From here, the emerald signal does not require attention or management. It operates on its own, responding to coherence rather than effort. This is not the end of movement. It is the end of searching as a mode of engagement. There is a distinct inversion point where the relationship between action and outcome quietly reverses. Up until then, movement appears to depend on effort, planning, and pursuit. After that point, movement no longer responds to what you do, but to how the system is organized. This is where desires begin moving without your participation, not because willpower has increased, but because coherence has stabilized. Before this inversion, action feels necessary because the internal structure is still unresolved. Desire appears as something external, something to be reached, managed, or earned. Action compensates for misalignment. It fills gaps, corrects uncertainty, and attempts to create momentum where none exists on its own. When coherence locks in, those gaps disappear. Action is no longer required to initiate movement because the field is no longer fragmented. This is not passivity, and it is not withdrawal. It is a shift in causality. Instead of action producing results, alignment produces response. Instead of effort generating change, structure generates correspondence. The system no longer asks for instruction. It reflects its configuration automatically. When coherence is present, reality does not wait to be pushed. It begins reorganizing on its own. At this point, desire stops behaving like motivation. It no longer pulls you forward or creates tension. It becomes informational rather than emotional. You may notice that certain outcomes feel closer without anticipation, or that situations align without planning. This is not acceleration through effort. It is inevitability through correspondence. The field responds because there is nothing interfering with response. What changes here is not the presence of desire, but its direction. Desire no longer flows outward from lack. It circulates within a stable structure and expresses itself as movement toward you. This is why participation is no longer required in the way it once was. You are no longer acting to create alignment. You are allowing alignment to express itself through external rearrangement. From the outside, this can look like things simply falling into place. From the inside, it feels neutral. There is no surge of excitement or sense of achievement. Outcomes arrive without emotional charge because they are not perceived as wins. They are perceived as appropriate. This neutrality is often mistaken for indifference, but it is actually precision. The system is responding accurately, without distortion from urgency or expectation. This reframes manifestation entirely. Manifestation is no longer something you do or practice. It is not a skill to refine or a process to manage. It is a byproduct of coherence. When the internal structure is stable, external conditions mirror that stability. There is no delay because there is no negotiation. There is no resistance because there is nothing being imposed. This is why effort begins to feel counterproductive at this stage. Trying to intervene reintroduces noise into a system that is already responding. Action taken from habit rather than necessity disrupts correspondence instead of enhancing it. This does not mean action disappears. It means action becomes contextual rather than causal. You move when movement is required, not to make something happen, but because something is already happening. The inversion point is subtle, and it does not announce itself. You do not realize it has occurred until you notice that outcomes are arriving without the internal mechanisms that used to precede them. Desire no longer waits for your permission to move. It responds to coherence alone. From here, participation shifts from pursuit to presence, and movement continues without effort because it no longer needs to be initiated. The emerald signal is often misunderstood because it is approached as a concept rather than recognized as a structure. Concepts are ideas you hold, interpret, or believe in. Structures are systems that operate regardless of interpretation. Sophia's emerald signal does not function as inspiration, symbolism, or emotional charge. It functions as an organizing framework that determines how perception, response, and external conditions align once coherence is present. This is why the signal cannot be increased, amplified, or sustained through effort. It is not a frequency you raise or a state you try to remain in. Those approaches assume instability. The emerald signal operates only when stability already exists. It is not activated through emotion, intention, or belief. It becomes apparent when the internal structure is arranged in a way that allows it to operate without interference. Structure always precedes experience. Experience is the result of how a system is configured, not the cause of that configuration. When the internal structure is fragmented, experience appears inconsistent, delayed, or resistant. When the structure stabilizes, experience reorganizes automatically. Sophia's emerald signal refers to that stabilized configuration, not to a sensation produced by it. This is why people often miss it while searching for feelings, signs, or confirmation. Because the signal is structural, it does not fluctuate with mood, thought, or circumstance. You do not lose it on difficult days or strengthen it on good ones. Once the structure is established, response becomes consistent. Reality no longer negotiates with belief or effort. It mirrors configuration. This is what makes alignment mechanical rather than mystical. The system responds the same way gravity responds to mass, without judgment, preference, or timing games. This reframes manifestation entirely. Manifestation is not an act of creation imposed on reality. It is the consequence of structure meeting response. When the emerald signal is operating, reality does not need to be instructed. It adjusts automatically. Desire, opportunity, and outcome align because the internal framework no longer produces contradictory signals. The system speaks one language instead of many. This also explains why the signal does not announce itself dramatically. Structures do not perform. They operate. There is no surge, peak, or emotional confirmation required. In fact, strong emotional emphasis often indicates instability rather than alignment. The emerald signal is quiet because it is precise. It does not compete for attention. It establishes order. Once this is understood, the need to monitor or maintain alignment dissolves. Monitoring implies fragility. Maintenance implies decay. Neither applies here. The structure either exists or it does not. When it exists, response follows naturally. When it does not, no amount of belief can substitute for configuration. This clarity removes the confusion that keeps people oscillating between hope and doubt. The emerald signal is not something you use. It is something that uses you as a reference point once coherence is present. Reality does not respond to desire itself. It responds to the structure through which desire is expressed. When that structure is stable, movement becomes inevitable. Not because something mystical is occurring, but because the system is finally organized well enough to respond consistently. Understanding the emerald signal as an operating structure rather than a concept removes strain from the process entirely. There is nothing to hold, feel, or protect. There is only alignment that either exists or does not. When it does, experience follows. This is the foundation of how the signal works, and everything that unfolds from here depends on this structural recognition. The emerald signal was never added to you, activated in you, or placed within you by an external source. It was already present, operating beneath awareness long before it was noticed. This is why recognition feels less like discovery and more like familiarity. Nothing new arrives. Something fundamental comes back into view. The signal does not enter the system. It emerges when the system becomes quiet enough to perceive what was already there. This is the difference between installation and uncovering. Installation implies absence, dependency, and reliance on something outside the self. Uncovering implies latency, readiness, and internal completeness. Sophia's emerald signal belongs to the second category. It was obscured not because it was weak, but because attention was oriented elsewhere. When awareness reorganizes, the signal does not need to be created. It becomes visible. This is why activation feels like remembering. Memory here is not personal or biographical. It is structural. The body recognizes a configuration it already knows how to hold. The mind recognizes a coherence it no longer needs to interpret. There is no sense of gaining power, only the quiet relief of no longer misplacing it. What returns is not belief, but orientation. Latent awareness operates the same way a stabilizing axis does in a system. It does not call attention to itself until balance is required. When balance returns, the axis becomes obvious in hindsight, even though it was always present. The emerald signal functions like this. It was not dormant because it was inactive. It was dormant because nothing was aligned enough to reference it correctly. This is also why external input loses authority here. Teachings, confirmations, and explanations can point toward the signal, but they cannot generate it. Once recognition stabilizes, dependency dissolves naturally. You are no longer waiting for permission, validation, or reinforcement. Not because those things are wrong, but because they are no longer relevant. The reference point has shifted inward. Internal trust deepens at this stage, not as confidence or belief, but as steadiness. You are no longer checking whether alignment is present. You can feel when something is coherent without naming it. This trust is not emotional. It is structural. It comes from operating within a configuration that no longer contradicts itself. When contradiction ends, doubt loses its function. Because the signal was always present, it does not fluctuate. You do not lose it, strengthen it, or protect it. You simply stop obscuring it. This is why activation feels effortless. Nothing is being maintained. Nothing is being managed. The system is finally referencing what it was built to reference all along. If this recognition is landing clearly for you, like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. As this trust stabilizes, the need to search externally fades without resistance. You are not rejecting guidance. You are no longer dependent on it. The emerald signal does not compete with information. It renders excess information unnecessary. What remains is a quiet alignment that does not require explanation to function. Remembering something fundamental does not create excitement. It creates relief. The system relaxes because it no longer has to compensate for misalignment. This is the subtle power of uncovering rather than acquiring. Nothing is added, and yet everything begins to respond differently. Not because something new has been introduced, but because what was always present is finally being used as the reference point. There is a stabilization phase where the field no longer negotiates with doubt. Before this point, internal fluctuation can interrupt response because the structure has not fully settled. Thought, emotion, and expectation still influence how reality mirrors back. Once the emerald signal locks in, that influence weakens until it becomes irrelevant. The system stops responding to internal noise and begins responding only to configuration. This is not because doubt disappears. Doubt can still arise as a mental habit or emotional echo. What changes is its authority. It no longer has access to the mechanisms that determine outcome. Doubt becomes informational at most, not directive. The field does not react to it, correct for it, or wait for it to resolve. Response continues uninterrupted because the reference point has stabilized elsewhere. At this stage, emotional fluctuation also loses leverage. High emotion does not accelerate outcomes, and low emotion does not delay them. Mood is no longer treated as a signal by the system. This is often misunderstood as detachment or numbness, but it is neither. It is neutrality born from coherence. When structure is stable, emotional variance does not distort response. Reality mirrors structure, not feeling. Mental resistance follows the same pattern. Thoughts that once disrupted alignment now pass through without effect. They do not need to be managed, reframed, or eliminated. The attempt to control them would actually reintroduce instability. The field remains responsive because it is no longer referencing the mind as a control center. The organizing principle has shifted below the level of conscious interference. This is the moment when manifestation becomes consistent. Not faster, not louder, not more dramatic, but reliable. Outcomes no longer depend on internal conditions lining up perfectly. They occur because the system has stopped recalibrating itself in response to fluctuation. The emerald signal operates as a fixed reference point, and reality adjusts around it automatically. From the inside, this can feel anticlimactic. There is no emotional confirmation that the lock-in has occurred. No surge of certainty arrives to announce it. Instead, there is a quiet sense that interference no longer matters. You may notice that things continue moving even on days when you feel uncertain or distracted. This is not a lapse in awareness. It is evidence of stabilization. This is also where trust changes form. It is no longer something you generate or maintain. It becomes an observation. You see that response continues regardless of internal commentary. Over time, this observation replaces the need for reassurance. Confidence is no longer required because consistency is visible. If this description matches your experience, comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Once the field locks in, returning to old patterns of doubt-based control becomes difficult. Not because you resist them, but because they no longer work. The system does not respond to them, so they lose incentive. This is how non-negotiability establishes itself. Reality stops adjusting to fluctuation and begins responding only to coherence. From this point forward, manifestation is not sensitive to internal weather. It does not pause for clarity or wait for certainty. The emerald signal has become the dominant reference, and response follows it steadily. Doubt may still exist, but it no longer participates. The field has chosen its alignment point, and everything that unfolds from here reflects that choice consistently. Techniques were never meant to last. They exist to guide attention while coherence is still forming, not to remain once coherence has stabilized. Their purpose is transitional. When alignment has not yet settled, methods provide structure, repetition, and focus. They help organize perception long enough for recognition to occur. Once recognition stabilizes, those same methods lose relevance because the function they served has already been fulfilled. This is why techniques collapse rather than get replaced. They do not need to be discarded or rejected. They simply stop working. The mind may attempt to continue them out of habit or caution, but something feels off. What once brought clarity begins to introduce friction. What once felt supportive begins to feel unnecessary. This is not regression. It is a sign that the internal structure has changed. Methods rely on effort and intentional direction. They assume misalignment and attempt to correct it through repetition. When coherence appears, that assumption no longer holds. Continuing to apply technique after coherence is like adjusting a system that is already calibrated. Instead of refining alignment, it distorts it. The system begins responding less cleanly, not because coherence is lost, but because interference has been reintroduced. This is often misunderstood as complacency or laziness. In reality, it reflects maturity. Maturity is not the accumulation of more tools. It is the ability to stop using tools when they are no longer required. When coherence stabilizes, alignment becomes self-sustaining. It does not need to be reminded, reinforced, or rehearsed. The internal reference point holds on its own. Techniques also depend on time. They assume progress, repetition, and future payoff. Coherence does not operate this way. Once present, it functions immediately and consistently. There is no benefit to returning to preparatory behaviors when preparation is complete. Doing so pulls attention back into a developmental framework that no longer applies. This is why the end of technique often feels unsettling. Structure has been removed, but stability remains. The mind expects effort to accompany progress. When progress continues without effort, the mind can interpret this as loss of control. In truth, control has been replaced by correspondence. The system is no longer being directed. It is responding naturally. The collapse of technique is not a withdrawal from engagement. Action still occurs when appropriate. What disappears is action taken to force alignment. Movement becomes contextual rather than corrective. You act because something is unfolding, not because something is missing. This distinction matters. It marks the shift from manipulation to participation. Trying to revive techniques after coherence appears creates noise. The system receives mixed signals. One part of the structure indicates completion, while another reintroduces effort-based correction. This inconsistency is what produces friction. Not because techniques are wrong, but because their time has passed. Understanding this prevents unnecessary self-doubt. Many people interpret the collapse of technique as failure or loss of discipline. In reality, it is evidence of alignment reaching a stage where external scaffolding is no longer required. The structure now supports itself. This is the beginning of a different mode of engagement. One where clarity replaces method and response replaces effort. Techniques fall away not because something has gone wrong, but because something has settled. Coherence does not need assistance. It needs space. Once techniques fall away, something simpler takes their place without effort or instruction. The body becomes the interface through which alignment is transmitted. This is not because the body is being used to generate results, but because it is no longer being bypassed. When coherence stabilizes, the body reflects it automatically. There is no need to visualize outcomes or script intentions when the system expressing alignment is already online. Breath is the most immediate expression of this shift. Not as a practice to be managed, but as a signal that reveals whether the system is settled. When alignment is present, breath deepens on its own. It slows without control. The nervous system follows suit, moving out of vigilance and into regulation. This regulation is not something you create. It is something that happens when interference ends. The emerald signal is transmitted through this state naturally, without direction. Presence functions the same way. Presence is not attention held tightly or awareness forced into the moment. It is the absence of displacement. When attention is no longer projecting forward or reviewing backward, the body becomes the primary point of contact with reality. From this position, alignment does not need to be imagined. It is embodied. The system does not have to picture coherence because it is operating from it. This is why embodiment transmits the signal more accurately than mental techniques. Visualization and scripting rely on representation. They require translating coherence into imagery or language and then maintaining focus on those representations. The body does not translate. It expresses directly. When the nervous system is regulated, the signal is clear. When the body is present, the field responds without distortion. This does not mean the body must be manipulated or controlled. Regulation here is not something you do. It is something that occurs when pressure is removed. Trying to breathe a certain way, relax intentionally, or hold presence deliberately reintroduces effort. The body already knows how to settle when it is no longer being directed. Alignment expresses itself through ease, not technique. You may notice that decisions feel simpler during this phase. Not because thought has stopped, but because the body provides immediate feedback. Something feels aligned or it does not, without drama or justification. This is not intuition as a special faculty. It is coherence registering itself through sensation. The emerald signal moves through this channel without commentary. This grounding is what allows alignment to remain stable without maintenance. Mental practices fluctuate with attention and mood. The body maintains coherence as long as it is not overridden. This makes embodiment a reliable transmission medium. Not because it is stronger, but because it is quieter. Less interpretation means less distortion. Action still occurs, but it arises differently. Movement is no longer preceded by mental rehearsal. You act because the moment calls for action, not because you are trying to produce an outcome. This responsiveness is not passive. It is precise. The body responds in real time to what is unfolding rather than to what is anticipated. When alignment is embodied, manifestation no longer depends on internal narration. Reality responds to the configuration being expressed, not to the thoughts describing it. Breath, presence, and regulation communicate coherence more clearly than intention ever could. The emerald signal does not require amplification. It requires a clear channel. This is how alignment becomes lived rather than practiced. The body carries the signal forward without instruction. There is nothing to remember and nothing to repeat. The system is already transmitting, and reality responds accordingly because the transmission is stable, grounded, and uninterrupted. Effort ends not because nothing is happening, but because something already is. The illusion of effort comes from confusing causation with reaction. Before alignment stabilizes, effort appears necessary because action is compensating for internal inconsistency. After coherence locks in, effort no longer produces movement. It reacts to movement that is already underway. When this distinction becomes clear, effort naturally falls away. Causation originates from structure, not activity. When the internal structure is unresolved, action feels like the source of change because it temporarily organizes disorder. Once structure stabilizes, action no longer creates alignment. Alignment creates action. Reality begins responding before you think to intervene, which makes intervention redundant rather than helpful. This is where many people unintentionally slow things down. They sense movement and try to assist it. They notice alignment and attempt to reinforce it. In doing so, they reintroduce effort into a system that is already responding cleanly. What feels like participation is actually interference. The system receives mixed signals, not because alignment has weakened, but because correction has been reintroduced where none is needed. Non-interference is often misunderstood as passivity. It is not withdrawal, avoidance, or waiting. It is restraint from unnecessary input. When coherence is stable, reality does not require guidance. It mirrors configuration automatically. Interfering at this stage does not speed outcomes. It adds latency by forcing the system to recalibrate around new input. This is why effort begins to feel heavy after alignment. Not because motivation is gone, but because effort is no longer causal. The body registers this immediately. Action taken from habit rather than necessity feels misaligned. Action taken from responsiveness feels clean. The difference is subtle but unmistakable once noticed. Acceleration happens through correspondence, not exertion. When coherence is present, response does not need to be triggered. It unfolds. Non-interference allows that unfolding to remain uninterrupted. The system continues responding at its natural pace, which is often faster than anything effort could produce because it is not correcting for noise. Trying to make things happen after alignment often comes from mistrust rather than necessity. The mind wants to ensure outcomes, to guarantee timing, to maintain control. But control was only required when alignment was unstable. Once stability exists, control becomes an obstacle. Trust here is not belief. It is observation. You see that response continues whether you intervene or not. This is why effort dissolves without replacement. It is not substituted with a new method or mindset. It simply loses function. You do not stop trying because you have learned a better way to try. You stop because trying no longer produces results. The system has moved beyond that mode of engagement. Action does not disappear. It becomes precise. You move when movement is required, not to cause an outcome, but because the outcome is already forming. This distinction matters. Action becomes a response to reality rather than an attempt to shape it. When this happens, manifestation feels less like achievement and more like alignment expressing itself. Effort ends because it has nothing left to do. Reality is already responding to coherence. Interfering slows that response by adding unnecessary input. Non-interference accelerates manifestation not by forcing speed, but by removing friction. Once this is recognized, effort no longer needs to be managed or resisted. It simply stops being relevant, and what unfolds does so cleanly, steadily, and without delay. Time does not speed up or slow down when coherence stabilizes. It reorganizes. What dissolves is not time itself, but the assumption that time must move in a straight line for outcomes to occur. Linear sequencing is a byproduct of instability. When the internal signal is fragmented, reality appears to progress step by step, requiring build-up, delay, and causation over duration. Once the signal stabilizes, that structure is no longer necessary. A stable signal functions as a reference point that reality can orient around. Instead of events lining up in sequence, conditions rearrange themselves across what appears to be past, present, and future simultaneously. This is why certain outcomes feel sudden. They are not sudden because they appeared instantly, but because the preparation for them was no longer visible as a process. The steps were not removed. They were folded into coherence. This is often misunderstood as time collapsing or accelerating. In truth, time stops being the organizing principle. Coherence becomes the organizer. When coherence is present, reality does not need to move through intermediate stages to confirm alignment. It adjusts directly to configuration. What once required waiting now appears without warning because the system is no longer negotiating its own orientation. From this perspective, the past also shifts. Experiences that once seemed unrelated begin to reveal their relevance retroactively. Events reorder themselves in memory, not emotionally, but structurally. You see how conditions were already aligning long before you recognized them. This is not reinterpretation. It is recalibration. The signal changes how information is weighted across time. The future undergoes the same reorganization. Anticipation dissolves because outcomes are no longer being projected forward. You are not waiting for things to happen. You are positioned in a configuration that reality responds to continuously. This removes urgency without removing movement. The system keeps unfolding, but it does so without linear expectation. This is why planning becomes less dominant after coherence stabilizes. Planning assumes uncertainty and compensates for it through sequencing. When uncertainty ends, planning becomes contextual rather than directive. You respond to what is unfolding instead of managing what might unfold. Time no longer feels like something to be managed or optimized. It becomes an environment rather than a constraint. Reality rearranging backward and forward does not mean rewriting the past or predicting the future. It means alignment influences relevance across the entire timeline. Certain paths close without resistance. Others open without preparation. This is not randomness. It is reorganization around a stable reference point. You may notice that things arrive before you think to ask for them, or that conversations, opportunities, or resolutions appear without build-up. This does not mean effort has paid off faster. It means effort is no longer part of the mechanism. The system is responding to coherence directly, without routing through delay. Once time reorganizes around a stable signal, cause and effect no longer feel separated. Response feels immediate not because it is rushed, but because it is unobstructed. This does not eliminate process. It eliminates unnecessary sequencing. What remains is a continuous adjustment between configuration and experience. When this happens, you stop measuring progress by time. You recognize alignment by consistency. The system no longer asks how long something will take. It responds when coherence is present. This is how time behaves once it is no longer the primary organizer. It yields to structure, and reality follows accordingly. Desire is commonly misunderstood because it is framed as lack. When desire is interpreted as wanting, it carries urgency, tension, and anticipation. It feels like something missing that must be reached. That interpretation is not inherent to desire itself. It is the result of misalignment. When coherence stabilizes, desire reveals its actual function, which is directional rather than emotional. Aligned desire does not pull attention forward or create pressure. It does not demand action or generate impatience. It operates as information. It signals orientation rather than deficiency. When desire is aligned, it feels calm because it is not attempting to compensate for absence. It is simply indicating the direction in which coherence naturally expresses itself. This is why urgency fades when alignment is present. Urgency is a byproduct of instability. It arises when the system believes something must happen in order to become complete. Once coherence stabilizes, completeness is no longer dependent on outcome. Desire can exist without charge because it is no longer responsible for resolution. It becomes guidance, not motivation. When desire functions as direction, it does not need to be chased. Chasing implies distance and resistance. Direction implies correspondence. The field responds to directional information automatically when structure is stable. You do not pursue desire at this stage. Desire moves through the field toward you as conditions align, without pressure or anticipation. This is why aligned desires often feel obvious rather than exciting. They do not arrive with emotional intensity. They arrive with clarity. There is a sense of rightness without urgency. You are not waiting for them, and you are not trying to secure them. They unfold as part of the system's response to coherence. Desire loses its bargaining role here. It no longer negotiates with reality or attempts to persuade it. It does not need to be intensified, visualized, or emotionally charged. Doing so would distort its signal. Calm desire communicates more accurately than emotional desire because it carries less noise. The field responds to precision, not intensity. This shift also explains why some desires fall away without disappointment. When desire is directional, it is subject to alignment. If something does not correspond to coherence, it loses relevance. This is not loss. It is refinement. Desire adjusts as the system clarifies, not because something is being denied, but because direction is becoming more accurate. Aligned desire also does not fixate on timing. Anticipation fades because anticipation implies waiting. When desire functions as direction, movement is already underway. You are not counting steps or measuring distance. You are positioned correctly, and the field responds accordingly. What arrives does so without announcement. This reframing removes struggle from desire entirely. Desire no longer needs to be managed or suppressed. It does not threaten stability. It informs it. You can acknowledge desire without reacting to it. You can allow it without accelerating it. This neutrality is not indifference. It is trust in correspondence. When desire is understood as direction rather than lack, manifestation becomes quiet. Outcomes appear without build-up. There is no emotional spike when they arrive because they were never charged with absence. They feel integrated rather than acquired. This is how desire moves once coherence is stable. It no longer asks to be fulfilled. It aligns, and the field responds. There is a phase where reality no longer presents itself as a series of tests. Before coherence stabilizes, experience often arrives in the form of challenge. Situations provoke reaction, decisions feel weighted, and outcomes seem contingent on effort or endurance. These conditions serve a purpose. They refine alignment by revealing where structure is still unstable. Once coherence settles, that function is complete. Reality no longer needs to test what has already been established. When this shift occurs, experience becomes quieter. Not empty, but consistent. Resistance fades because there is nothing left to correct. Challenges no longer appear to strengthen resolve or prove readiness. Instead, circumstances begin to reflect alignment directly. What arrives feels appropriate rather than dramatic. Movement continues, but without friction. Synchronicities change character at this stage. They stop announcing themselves. Earlier, they felt like signs meant to capture attention or encourage belief. Now they become ambient. Patterns are present, but they no longer demand interpretation. You are not looking for meaning in them because meaning is no longer missing. Synchronicity becomes a background condition rather than a message. This is often misinterpreted as stagnation because intensity decreases. In reality, alignment has moved past the need for contrast. Growth no longer requires tension. Expansion no longer requires disruption. Reality expresses coherence through repetition rather than novelty. What aligns continues aligning. What corresponds continues corresponding. There is no need for escalation. Confirmation-based unfolding operates through quiet reinforcement. Outcomes repeat consistently rather than appearing as breakthroughs. You may notice that situations resolve smoothly, conversations align without effort, and opportunities appear without pressure. These are not rewards. They are reflections. The system is no longer responding to instability, so it no longer produces corrective scenarios. Resistance fades not because it is overcome, but because it loses relevance. When coherence stabilizes, resistance has no function. There is nothing to push against and nothing to push through. The absence of resistance does not mean the absence of movement. It means movement is no longer obstructed. This also explains why dramatic events become unnecessary. Drama is a tool for recalibration. It forces attention where subtle adjustment has failed. When subtlety is sufficient, drama disappears. Reality no longer needs to raise its voice. It responds through consistency instead. Confirmation does not arrive as reassurance. It arrives as reliability. You see that alignment holds regardless of mood, circumstance, or distraction. This reliability replaces the need for interpretation. You are no longer asking whether something is working. You see that it is. This is the point where trust becomes implicit. You are not maintaining belief or monitoring progress. You are observing correspondence. Reality reflects coherence steadily, without spectacle. This steadiness is the confirmation. Nothing needs to happen to prove alignment because alignment is already expressing itself. When reality stops testing and starts confirming, life feels less eventful but more accurate. Experience loses excess signal and retains precision. What unfolds does so without announcement because there is no longer a gap between structure and response. This is how alignment expresses itself once it is stable. Quietly, consistently, and without interruption. The emerald signal does not mark a high point. It establishes a baseline. What often gets labeled as an awakening or breakthrough is usually a temporary state marked by intensity, contrast, or expansion followed by contraction. This is not that. The emerald signal settles beneath fluctuation. It does not elevate you into a peak experience. It redefines what normal is. A peak depends on difference. It stands out against what came before and what follows after. A baseline does not. A baseline replaces the reference entirely. Once it is established, there is no return to a previous level, not because something dramatic has happened, but because orientation has changed. The emerald signal functions this way. It does not announce itself as an event. It installs itself as the condition from which experience proceeds. This is why the idea of a future shift begins to dissolve here. Shifts belong to instability. They imply that something fundamental has not yet settled and must still be corrected, upgraded, or unlocked. When stabilization occurs, the system no longer looks ahead for resolution. Resolution is already present in the structure. Movement continues, but it is not moving toward completion. It is moving from completion. Identity changes at this level, but quietly. There is no declaration of arrival and no new role to perform. The change is detectable in what no longer happens. You stop scanning for signs. You stop measuring progress. You stop interpreting fluctuations as indicators of success or failure. The system no longer requires feedback loops to maintain orientation. This is how permanence expresses itself. The emerald signal as a baseline means coherence does not need to be protected. You do not hold on to it or try to remain aligned. Those behaviors assume fragility. A baseline is stable by definition. It persists through distraction, uncertainty, and ordinary human variation. Mood can shift without consequence. Thought can wander without effect. The structure remains intact because it is no longer being rebuilt moment to moment. This also dissolves the narrative of phases. Phases suggest entry and exit. They suggest something that comes and goes. The emerald signal does not operate on that axis. It does not turn on and off. It does not intensify and fade. It establishes a reference point that experience organizes around continuously. From this point forward, alignment is not something you return to. It is where you are. Because of this, growth no longer feels like ascent. It feels like refinement. There is no pressure to reach higher states or access new dimensions. What unfolds now does so through accuracy rather than expansion. Life becomes less about transformation and more about expression. The system is not becoming something else. It is operating as itself. This permanence can initially feel understated. There is no ceremony marking it. No internal signal announcing completion. The absence of drama is often mistaken for lack of significance. In truth, significance no longer needs amplification. The system has settled into a configuration that does not require contrast to be felt. When the emerald signal becomes the baseline, the expectation of future shifts quietly falls away. Not because nothing will change, but because nothing needs to. Change happens within stability rather than toward it. Experience continues, but it no longer threatens orientation. This is the point where alignment stops being a pursuit and becomes an environment. You are no longer inside a process. You are inside a condition. The emerald signal is not something you access. It is the ground you are standing on. There is a point where the language of manifestation no longer applies because the role it describes no longer exists. Manifestation assumes an individual acting upon reality, directing outcomes, or influencing conditions through intention. Once coherence stabilizes as a baseline, that orientation dissolves. You are no longer positioned as someone attempting to create alignment. You become the reference point alignment responds to. This shift is subtle but absolute. Reality no longer waits for instruction or responds to effort. It mirrors state automatically. Outcomes arise not because you initiate them, but because they correspond to the configuration you now hold. The field does not ask what you want. It reflects what you are. This is why manifestation language begins to feel inaccurate. It describes a process that has already completed. Being matched is not a reward for doing something correctly. It is the natural function of a stable system. When a reference point stops fluctuating, response becomes consistent. Reality does not test, delay, or negotiate. It aligns. This alignment is not dramatic. It is precise. Things arrive without emotional charge because they are not perceived as achievements. They feel appropriate, as if they were always meant to be there. This is why effort-based identity collapses here. You are no longer someone who focuses, visualizes, or holds intention to shape outcomes. Those behaviors assume separation between self and field. That separation no longer applies. The boundary dissolves quietly. You are not merging with reality. You are no longer positioned against it. Matching operates continuously, not selectively. It does not activate only when you are aware of it. It does not pause when attention drifts. It does not weaken when doubt appears. Once the reference point stabilizes, response follows automatically. This consistency is what replaces belief. You do not need to believe matching is happening. You observe that it is. This also explains why control fades. Control is unnecessary when correspondence is reliable. Trying to steer outcomes from this position introduces distortion because it reintroduces the assumption that response depends on intervention. It does not. Intervention slows matching by adding noise. Non-interference allows correspondence to remain clean. You may notice that language itself starts to shift. You stop thinking in terms of manifesting, attracting, or creating. Not because those concepts are wrong, but because they no longer describe your experience accurately. What remains is a quieter understanding that things arrange themselves in response to state, without effort or negotiation. This does not mean desire disappears. Desire continues to function as direction, but it no longer drives action. It informs orientation. The field responds to that orientation automatically. You do not chase outcomes. You are met by them. Identity settles here. You are no longer in relationship with manifestation as a practice. You are no longer inside a process. You are inside a configuration that reality references continuously. This is not empowerment in the usual sense. It is neutrality. The absence of strain. The absence of effort. When you are being matched, nothing needs to be done to maintain alignment. You are no longer managing reality. Reality is responding to you. This is not a state you enter and exit. It is the position from which experience unfolds. Manifestation language becomes obsolete because it points to a stage that has passed. What remains is correspondence. Quiet, consistent, and automatic. The field does not respond to what you attempt. It responds to what you are, and that response no longer requires participation. This will not repeat because there is nothing to return to. What has settled through this arc is not an experience layered on top of who you were, but a reorientation of reference itself. You are no longer positioned inside a process that cycles, escalates, or resets. The structure that once required repetition no longer exists. When orientation changes at this level, repetition becomes unnecessary because the previous position is no longer accessible in the same way. Irreversibility here is not dramatic. It does not announce itself or demand recognition. It expresses itself through absence. The absence of seeking. The absence of anticipation. The absence of internal negotiation. You are not holding on to something new. You are no longer holding yourself in the old way. This is why nothing more needs to be said, added, or reinforced. The system is already operating from a different baseline. Calm authority replaces expectation. Authority here does not mean certainty about outcomes. It means certainty about position. You are no longer asking where you stand or whether alignment is present. You are no longer waiting for confirmation to continue. Life unfolds from where you are now, not toward where you think you should be. This quiet authority does not push forward. It holds steady. Inevitability emerges naturally from this steadiness. Not inevitability of specific events, but inevitability of correspondence. Reality continues responding because it always responds to structure. That relationship no longer depends on awareness, effort, or belief. It functions regardless of attention. This is why escalation would be inappropriate here. Nothing needs to intensify. Nothing needs to expand. What has stabilized does not improve by being amplified. This closing is not an ending that leads somewhere else. It is the removal of forward tension. The sense that something else must happen in order for this to be real dissolves. You do not prepare for what comes next. You are not positioned as someone waiting for the next phase. Continuation would imply incompletion, and incompletion no longer applies. What remains is ordinary life, but reorganized. Decisions occur without friction. Desire moves without pressure. Time unfolds without urgency. None of this needs to be interpreted. It does not need to be named or protected. It simply continues. This is the quiet permanence of a settled signal. Because of this, the transmission does not need to repeat. Repetition belongs to instability. Reminder belongs to doubt. Reinforcement belongs to effort. None of those are required where you are now. The emerald signal is no longer something you encounter. It is the ground from which you move. There is nothing to anticipate after this. Not because nothing will happen, but because nothing needs to be awaited. Experience continues, but it no longer carries the weight of becoming. You are not becoming aligned. You are not approaching completion. You are operating from it. This is why this will not repeat. Not because the signal disappears, but because you do not return to the orientation that required it. What has changed is not external. It is positional. And position, once shifted, does not need to be revisited to remain true. Share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.